You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Contracts and assessments form the backbone of compliant personal data processing in modern privacy frameworks. While laws define broad rights and obligations, it is contracts that operationalize these duties between businesses and their vendors, affiliates, and service providers. A carefully drafted data protection agreement ensures that personal information is processed only in ways that are consistent with legal requirements, organizational policies, and consumer expectations. Assessments, on the other hand, provide structured analysis of higher-risk activities, documenting the reasoning and safeguards behind decisions. Together, these tools provide accountability. Contracts show how responsibilities are allocated, while assessments demonstrate why practices are justified. Both are designed not just for legal defense, but also for building a culture of careful stewardship around data, aligning business operations with the principles of fairness, necessity, and proportionality. Role definitions are the starting point in any data protection contract. Agreements must specify whether a party acts as a controller, processor, service provider, or contractor. Controllers determine why and how personal data is processed, while processors act under their instruction. Service provider and contractor terms are often used in state privacy laws, with subtle but important distinctions in obligations. Clarifying roles is critical because it dictates who bears responsibility for responding to consumer requests, implementing safeguards, and ensuring lawful bases of processing. Without explicit role definitions, disputes can arise over accountability, leaving gaps in compliance that regulators and courts are quick to identify. Processing instruction clauses define the purpose, scope, and lawful basis for using data. These clauses prevent processors from improvising or expanding the ways data is used beyond what was agreed. For example, a contract might state that email addresses collected for account registration cannot be repurposed for marketing unless expressly authorized. Limiting scope protects consumers from misuse and provides businesses with defensibility if practices are challenged. The lawful basis element, whether consent, contractual necessity, or legal obligation, grounds the processing in a justifiable rationale, reinforcing that every use of personal data must be tied to an explicit and legitimate purpose. Contracts must also address the categories of personal data being processed, highlighting any sensitive categories such as health, biometric, or precise geolocation information. These flags trigger additional restrictions and heighten safeguards. For example, a processor handling biometric templates must comply with strict retention and security obligations. Secondary use and data sale restrictions are equally important. Service providers must commit not to use personal data for their own benefit or to transfer it to third parties without authorization. These provisions prevent shadow data flows and preserve the integrity of consumer expectations. Duration and location terms anchor processing boundaries in time and geography. Contracts must state how long data will be processed, ensuring that use does not continue indefinitely without purpose. Location clauses identify where data may be stored or processed, with some laws restricting international transfers or requiring specific safeguards. Permitted transfer routes, such as binding corporate rules or standard contractual clauses, may also be specified. These terms ensure that processing remains consistent with both legal requirements and organizational risk tolerances, protecting data across its full life cycle. Confidentiality obligations provide assurance that those handling personal data are bound by secrecy and professionalism. Contracts should require personnel vetting, training, and clear limits on access, emphasizing that only individuals with a need to know should have entry to sensitive data. Confidentiality commitments also extend beyond the term of the contract, ensuring that obligations persist even after relationships end. These clauses reinforce the principle that personal data must not only be technically secure, but also respected in human handling. Security measures must be explicitly described, often mapped to risks, data classifications, and regulatory duties. Contracts may require encryption, access controls, monitoring, and regular penetration testing. They may also demand alignment with recognized standards, such as ISO certifications or NIST frameworks. By defining safeguards in measurable terms, contracts prevent vague promises of, quote, reasonable security, and replace them with enforceable commitments. Security clauses transform abstract duties into practical, auditable actions, ensuring that technical and organizational measures align with the sensitivity of the data being processed. Sub-processor clauses address the layered reality of modern service delivery. Contracts should require processors to seek approval before engaging sub-processors, maintain disclosure lists, and flow down obligations through their contracts. These provisions prevent data from cascading into uncontrolled, third-party ecosystems. Transparency about sub-processors allows controllers to assess risk and maintain trust with consumers. Without these clauses, accountability erodes as data passes through unseen hands, undermining both compliance and consumer confidence. Audit and assessment rights give controllers the ability to verify compliance. Contracts should specify the frequency, scope, and reasonable limitations of audits, balancing accountability with operational feasibility. Evidence reviews, such as certifications or third-party audits, may supplement direct inspections. These rights are not mere formalities. They are critical enforcement mechanisms that ensure contractual commitments translate into practice. Businesses that fail to honor audit provisions risk both legal liability and reputational damage if non-compliance is later revealed. Incident and breach notification clauses establish clear timelines and cooperation duties. Contracts may require processors to notify controllers within 24, 48, or 72 hours of discovering a breach, aligning with state or international requirements. Cooperation tasks may include providing forensic reports, coordinating with regulators, and supporting consumer notifications. These clauses ensure that breaches are not concealed or delayed, preserving both legal compliance and trust. In practice, timely notification can mitigate harm and demonstrate that partners are acting in good faith during crises. Assisting with data subject rights is another contractual requirement. Processors and service providers must commit to supporting controllers in fulfilling consumer requests for access, deletion, correction, and portability. Without these commitments, controllers may struggle to meet statutory timelines and obligations. Contracts should define how requests are communicated, how quickly processors must respond, and what evidence must be provided. These obligations operationalize consumer rights across the supply chain, ensuring that rights are not blocked by contractual gaps. Contracts also govern data retention and deletion. Clauses should specify retention limits, require deletion or return of data at the end of the term, and demand verification of destruction. Exceptions for legal holds or regulatory obligations should be carefully defined. These provisions ensure that data does not persist unnecessarily, reducing both security risk and regulatory exposure. Retention and deletion clauses bring lifecycle management into contractual form, aligning organizational practice with legal expectations. International transfer safeguards are essential when data crosses borders. Contracts may reference recognized mechanisms such as standard contractual clauses, binding corporate rules, or adequacy decisions. They may also include supplemental measures like encryption in transit and at rest. These provisions address the reality that cross-border transfers remain a high-stakes area of privacy regulation. For businesses, explicit contractual safeguards provide defensibility in an area where enforcement risk is particularly acute. Liability and indemnity clauses allocate responsibility for failures. If a processor mishandles personal data or fails to implement safeguards, contracts may require them to indemnify the controller for resulting costs. Limitations of liability may also apply, though regulators scrutinize overly broad limitations. These clauses ensure that accountability is not only theoretical but financial, creating incentives for compliance. Properly balanced liability terms protect both parties while reinforcing consumer protection. Change in law provisions acknowledge the evolving nature of privacy regulation. Contracts should include paths for amendment if laws or regulations shift, along with designated governance contacts responsible for overseeing updates. Without such clauses, contracts risk becoming outdated quickly in a rapidly changing legal environment. Including adaptation mechanisms ensures agility and prevents disputes when new requirements arise. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Data protection assessments provide the analytical counterpart to contracts, ensuring that high-risk processing activities are not only permitted but also carefully evaluated. At their core, these assessments document context, necessity, proportionality, and potential alternatives, demonstrating that privacy has been considered before launching a project. They function as risk files that regulators can review and as accountability artifacts for boards and executives. By embedding assessments into program workflows, organizations move beyond reactive compliance into proactive governance, showing that data use is a deliberate and justified choice. These tools transform privacy into a measurable, reviewable practice that integrates with overall risk management. Triggers for assessments are defined by state laws and organizational policies. Common triggers include processing sensitive categories of personal data, engaging in targeted advertising, or using profiling to make significant decisions about individuals. For example, launching a wellness app that collects biometric information would require a data protection assessment, as would deploying an AI-driven hiring tool. These triggers ensure that attention is focused on activities with the greatest potential for harm. By establishing clear thresholds, organizations avoid wasting resources on low-risk operations, while ensuring that higher-risk practices receive careful review. Methodology is central to defensible assessments. A comprehensive assessment should describe the context of processing, explain why it is necessary, evaluate whether less intrusive alternatives exist, and analyze proportionality. For instance, collecting precise geolocation data may be necessary for fleet management, but not for simple delivery notifications. Documenting this reasoning demonstrates that privacy risks were considered in light of business goals. Methodology transforms assessments from checklists into thoughtful analyses, aligning organizational decisions with legal expectations and consumer trust. Risk identification is a key component, encompassing confidentiality, integrity, availability, and fairness. Confidentiality risks might involve unauthorized access, while integrity risks include inaccurate or misleading data. Availability risks consider whether systems could fail, creating consumer harm. Fairness looks at whether processing could produce discriminatory outcomes, particularly in algorithmic decision-making. Identifying risks across these dimensions ensures that assessments are holistic, not narrowly technical. This broad framing reflects the principle that privacy risks are as much about fairness and dignity as they are about security. Mitigation planning follows naturally from risk identification. Organizations must specify the technical, organizational, and contractual controls that will reduce identified risks. For example, pseudonymization and access controls can mitigate confidentiality risks, while bias testing can reduce fairness risks in algorithms. Contractual safeguards may include stricter service provider obligations. By linking risks to mitigations, assessments show that risks are not merely acknowledged but actively managed. This planning reinforces accountability and creates a roadmap for operational controls. Residual risk statements document what remains after mitigations are applied. Organizations must explain why they accept these risks, whether because they are unavoidable, outweighed by benefits, or reduced to an acceptable threshold. For example, even after encryption and access controls, some risk of insider misuse may remain. Documenting acceptance rationales prevents risk from being ignored and ensures that leaders are aware of trade-offs. Escalation thresholds may require that high residual risks be approved by senior management or boards, embedding privacy into governance structures. Stakeholder review cycles enrich assessments by incorporating multiple perspectives. Legal teams ensure compliance, security teams validate technical measures, product teams align with business goals, and ethics committees provide fairness oversight. This cross-functional input prevents tunnel vision and creates assessments that reflect organizational complexity. For example, a new analytics tool may meet security requirements but raise ethical concerns about consumer profiling. Stakeholder reviews surface these issues before deployment, ensuring that decisions are balanced and informed. Vendors also play a role in assessments. Where processors or service providers materially influence risk posture, they must participate in providing evidence of controls, certifications, or impact analyses. For example, a cloud provider hosting sensitive data may be required to share audit reports or security attestations. Vendor participation ensures that assessments extend across the data ecosystem, recognizing that risks often originate outside organizational boundaries. Incorporating vendors into assessments reinforces shared accountability and strengthens supply chain governance. Decision logs, approvals, and version control transform assessments into accountability artifacts. Each assessment should include a record of who made decisions, what evidence was reviewed, and when approvals occurred. Version control tracks changes over time, ensuring that assessments are living documents rather than one-time exercises. These records provide defensibility if regulators question whether risks were evaluated properly. They also enable organizations to learn from past assessments, building institutional memory that improves future decision-making. Retention of assessments is itself a compliance obligation. Documents must be securely stored for defined periods, often several years, and made available to regulators upon request. Secure storage prevents tampering and ensures integrity, while retention timelines demonstrate ongoing accountability. For example, a state regulator may request copies of assessments for high-risk advertising practices, and organizations must be prepared to provide them. Retention practices highlight that assessments are not internal exercises only, they are potential evidence of compliance. Integration with privacy by design processes ensures that assessments are conducted at the right time. Embedding assessments into intake workflows, change management, and release gates ensures that new projects are reviewed before launch. This prevents privacy from being an afterthought and creates a structured checkpoint. For example, a new customer app cannot be released until its data protection assessment is complete and approved. Integration aligns privacy with broader project governance, ensuring that risk management is part of innovation rather than a barrier to it. Metrics allow organizations to measure the effectiveness of their assessment programs. Tracking throughput shows how many assessments are completed, timeliness measures whether they occur before launch, and closure rates demonstrate whether mitigations are implemented. Metrics create visibility for leaders, showing whether the program is functioning or needs improvement. For example, repeated delays in completing assessments may reveal resourcing gaps. By quantifying program performance, metrics transform assessments into a manageable, evaluative process rather than a static obligation. Annual reevaluation is critical for keeping assessments current. Processing activities evolve, incidents reveal new risks, and legal standards shift. Laws often require periodic reassessment, particularly after material changes or breaches. Annual reviews ensure that past assessments are not stale and that mitigations remain effective. For example, a profiling tool may require reevaluation if regulators issue new guidance on algorithmic fairness. Reassessment demonstrates continuous accountability and prevents complacency in high-risk processing. Board-level summaries elevate assessments into strategic governance. Leaders need concise reports that highlight key risks, mitigation progress, and residual issues requiring oversight. Summaries translate technical findings into business language, enabling boards to align privacy with organizational priorities. For example, summaries may highlight that targeted advertising remains a high residual risk area, prompting resource allocation for additional safeguards. Board engagement signals to regulators and stakeholders that privacy is not siloed but embedded in enterprise governance. Data protection agreements and assessments together form the twin pillars of defensible privacy governance. Contracts allocate responsibilities and establish enforceable safeguards, while assessments provide documented reasoning for higher-risk decisions. Both tools emphasize precision, proportionality, and accountability. By aligning contractual obligations with thoughtful assessments, organizations create programs that are not only legally compliant but also ethically robust. This synthesis transforms privacy from a reactive compliance function into a proactive governance practice, ensuring that personal data is handled with care, clarity, and defensibility. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.